Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ohio EPA's 2022 Virtual Compliance Assistance Conference. My name is Rachel Dininger, and I'm with the Division of Environmental and Financial Assistance here at Ohio EPA, and will be moderating the What to Expect during a hazardous waste inspection session. Ohio EPA's 2022 Virtual Compliance Assistance Conference has 24 sessions over 2 weeks. This is today's first of 3 sessions focusing on universal and hazardous waste regulations. Registration information and a conference agenda are located on the Ohio EPA's conference webpage. We hope you were able to join us for additional conference sessions. All right, before we get started, we would like to point your attention to one of today's environmental fun facts. Did you know that there are conditional exclusions for solvent-contaminated wipes and how they're managed? Solvent-contaminated wipes that are sent for disposal are excluded from the hazardous waste rules if specific conditions are met. Some of the conditions include container requirements, labeling, accumulation time limits, and proper documentation. There is also a solid waste exclusion for solvent-contaminated wipes that are laundered and reused. You can scan the QR code on this slide to learn more about how to manage solvent-contaminated wipes. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, Frank Zingales. Frank is an environmental specialist at Ohio EPA's Northeast District Office in Twinsburg. He's worked for Ohio EPA for more than 25 years in the Division of Environmental Response and Revitalization in the Hazardous Waste Program. Mr. Zingales inspects hazardous waste handling facilities for compliance with Ohio's hazardous waste, universal waste, and used oil regulations. Frank has a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering technology from the University of Dayton. This session's subject matter experts are Karen Nesbitt and Christy Shipley from the Division of Environmental Response and Revitalization. Let's turn it over to our presenter. Here's Frank.
Rachel, thanks for the intro. I appreciate it. And welcome to everyone attending today's session. Value the opportunity to speak with you all concerning what goes on or what occurs during the course of a hazardous waste inspection. As Rachel mentioned, this presentation is available in the handouts section, so there will be a variety of information and links that are presented today. Feel free to refer to that handout so you're not feverishly taking notes or taking photographs, things of that nature. So today, as I mentioned, I will be presenting what occurs during an Ohio EPA hazardous waste inspection. In addition, though, I will spend a little bit of time talking about the Ohio EPA inspection process. All right, for today, a couple learning objectives that I would like to cover. First off, we'll cover an overview of the inspection process, both from the Ohio EPA agency perspective as well as the hazardous waste perspective. In addition, I'll cover what hazardous waste inspectors look for, how to prepare for an inspection, common violations that are found during the inspection, and some do's and don'ts during the inspection. All right, at this point, let's take a quick poll. And that poll is, have you ever participated in a hazardous waste inspection with Ohio EPA? The question or your answer would be yes or no. And Rachel's gonna launch the poll.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and launch that now. All right, it looks like about 75% of you have voted. If you haven't voted yet, please go ahead and submit your response. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And I'll go ahead and share the results.
All right. Well, the results are in. Looks like the majority of folks attending today's presentation have not participated in a hazardous waste inspection. So hopefully you'll find some of this information useful, as well as the compliance assistance information that we're going to offer to you today. So let's go back to our presentation. All right. At this point, I wanted to spend a few minutes on the Ohio EPA inspection process prior to getting into some of the specifics of a hazardous waste inspection. From the agency's perspective, there are different divisions within Ohio EPA that have their own inspectors. And what I mean by that is I'm with the hazardous waste program, whereas my counterparts that will conduct inspections also for the surface water programs, which can include direct discharges or even stormwater compliance issues, our drinking and groundwater section, our waste section being like the hazardous waste program or the solid and infectious waste programs, as well as air pollution control and our environmental response and revitalization. Now, the other thing to recognize is that some of these programs have delegated their compliance programs to local regulatory agencies. And what I mean by that is for the Division of Air Pollution Control, they may have delegated their compliance programs to air locals. For example, here in the Cleveland area, the Cleveland Division of Air Quality will be the local air authority for those type of programs. In addition, here in Cuyahoga County, the local health department as well as the Cleveland Health Department have authorities for solid and infectious waste inspections. So it's important to note that, like I said, there may be some other local regulatory agencies that have authority to implement the Ohio EPA regulatory programs. As such, your business may be inspected by different inspectors representing different programs over time. That being said, I may be conducting a hazardous waste inspection. However, I may identify concerns that I may want to raise to other programs within our agency. My purpose is compliance with the hazardous waste rules and laws. However, as I mentioned, there may be a concern that I'll raise to our surface water staff. In addition, recognize that some entities may undergo what we call a multimedia inspection. And that multimedia inspection means 2 or more inspectors may visit the facility at a time to inspect for the inspector's programmatic requirements. For example, I may conduct an inspection with our solid waste group or even our surface water program. Next slide that I'd like to cover is how our inspections selected by Ohio EPA. First off, Ohio EPA is authorized to implement certain programs, whether that be hazardous waste, Clean Water Act, or even the Clean Air Act. As such, we have grant commitments to US EPA that we need to fulfill. And those grant commitments will cover large permitted facilities, commercial waste treatment facilities, or even large quantity generators of hazardous waste. So the bulk of our inspections are grant or annual inspections that we need to do for US EPA. However, we also will conduct complaint investigations. We'll also conduct inspections at facilities that may have significant non-compliance. And what I mean by that is if there's been compliance issues identified previously, we may follow up more frequently with that entity to ensure that compliance is being fulfilled or that they are in compliance going forward. In addition, there may be special inspection initiatives where certain industries are selected for inspections. That could be dry cleaners, salvage yards, or even construction sites and their stormwater control management. Also, with regard to the inspections, depending on division policy, these inspections may be scheduled in advance or unannounced. What I will say, most complaint-driven inspections are announced, And from the hazardous waste perspective, our inspections are generally conducted unannounced. As far as the inspection process, which you can expect amongst all the programs here at the agency, is this general flow represented here. We're going to have an opening meeting with the facility when we arrive at the site, followed by a facility walkthrough and records review. That could be dependent on the order or it could vary. And then followed by a closing meeting and a letter. Each of these steps I'll detail more specifically to the hazardous waste inspection process. Also recognize that there are other training opportunities that are been provided covering the air inspection process as well as the surface water or water inspection process. Those are different webinars that are being presented as part of the Virtual Compliance Assistance Conference this year. A couple other points to consider for all Ohio EPA inspections. So before the inspection, have a plan. And what I mean by that is prior to any type of inspection, start thinking about these questions that are presented on this slide. First off, who will talk to the inspector? And then as far as after selecting that individual, have a backup for that person. Unfortunately or undoubtedly, sometimes when we show up, the individual that we need to speak with is not available. So having somebody that can fill in for them during the course of the inspection is very helpful. Typical individuals that we speak with during the course of the inspection are the EHS manager or plant manager, pollution control operators, and if it's a public entity, like a utility director. The other thing that you would want to have available to you is a camera that works. Many times agency inspectors will take photographs. You can request copies of those, but you may also want to obtain photographs at the same time the inspector is taking photographs. Know how you're going to describe your operations. What are you doing at your business? The types of waste that you generate, your discharges, your emissions, things of that nature. You want to be able to describe that to the inspector so that they can understand your processes. And as I mentioned, either waste, discharges, or emissions that are occurring from your facility. And lastly, know where your environmental compliance records are kept. I can't stress that more than anything is keeping those records organized and available for time of the inspection. When the inspector arrives, first, please find out why the inspection is being done. In many cases, it's a routine inspection, as I mentioned, because of these grant type commitments. In addition, please request the identification of the inspector and ask for the inspector's business card. Find out who the individual is and get that inspector's business card so you can ensure that you have or you're able to communicate with that individual going forward. If there's any special safety requirements at your facility, we'd ask you to identify those. For example, if there's a training video or some type of safety video that we need to watch, please let us know about that, obviously, and we'll fulfill that requirement. Next thing, take a deep breath and relax. And what I mean by that is, yes, our main focus is compliance, but also recognize that we're going to offer compliance assistance. So if there's some type of issue that is identified, your inspector will work with you to, if needed, get you back into compliance or provide you with compliance assistance resources. And lastly, answer the inspector's questions. And when I mention that is, it's okay to follow up with the inspector if you don't know the answer to their question. Please don't guess. We'd rather have complete information as well as accurate information. So it's okay to follow up with us if you don't have an immediate answer to that question. All right. So at this point, what I'd like to do is focus on some of the specifics of the hazardous waste inspections. So hazardous waste inspections will cover the laws and rules related to hazardous waste, used oil, and universal waste. Our hazardous waste inspection types, as you may note, kind of have this similar to the overall agency inspections, but planned inspections, meaning we will evaluate certain industry types, for example, large quantity generators of hazardous waste or treatment, storage, and disposal facilities, or TSDFs. Generally speaking, large quantity generators are inspected every 3 to 5 years, as well as the treatment, storage, and disposal facilities are inspected on at least an annual basis. These types of inspections are grant commitments that we do have to US EPA to fulfill our implementation authority under the RCRA program. We will also conduct complaint investigations, as well as participate in multimedia inspections with other programs. As I mentioned, we may participate with our air, water, or other waste staff. From the hazardous waste perspective, once again, these inspections are conducted as unannounced inspections. The other thing that I'd like to mention to you is US EPA may also conduct inspections in Ohio. So it's not, don't be surprised if you were to be contacted by US EPA for some compliance inspection. Many times they are conducting inspections at larger permitted facilities, and they will be conducting a multimedia inspection. But generally speaking, US EPA Region 5 would be doing those. Okay, wanted to take a minute to talk about virtual site visits. Some of the folks participating today may have participated in a virtual site visit, in particular with the hazardous waste program. This was implemented during the height of the pandemic. And really what that allowed us to do is to obviously conduct these inspections virtually. We will still do a virtual site visit when the conditions or when some situations allow us to do that. They will not be done for compliance evaluations for hazardous waste purposes, but there may be some limited circumstances where we have a specific focus that we will use the virtual site visit to conduct that inspection. Okay, talking about the hazardous waste program, just wanted to cover some of the basics of hazardous waste, and in particular, hazardous waste, this concept of cradle to grave management. So the RCRA program or hazardous waste program covers waste, hazardous waste, that upon generation at the generating facility, through its transport, and ultimately through its transport to a treatment, storage, and disposal facility. RCRA, or the hazardous waste program, covers all of these portions of the movement of the hazardous waste. Okay, the other thing I would like to bring your attention to is for the hazardous waste inspections, understanding what your hazardous waste generator category is. First, understanding your hazardous waste generator category is a requirement of the hazardous waste rules. It's making a determination as to your generator status. Based on that generator status will dictate what type of rules you need to comply with. In addition, your generator status is determined by the amount of hazardous waste that you generate on a monthly basis or that you may accumulate on site. Very small quantity generators have fewer regulations, and then as you generate more and more hazardous waste, you may find yourself in a small or large quantity generator status. Each of those generator categories have more requirements associated with them. As far as the generator categories, one thing I would like to point out to your attention is there is some compliance assistance information that I've shared today. You will find that in the handouts section and the compliance assistance links that are available to you. In particular, there is a table, or I should say a summary table of the regulations as well as the record keeping requirements for each generator category. So take a look at that information, and you can apply that to your stat or to your generator category. All right, and then lastly, the last step in this cradle to grave management process is the permitted treatment, storage, and disposal facilities. Really, they are the last link. They ensure the proper management of your hazardous waste. In order to conduct TSDF type of activities, there are extensive requirements that are authorized through an Ohio Hazardous Waste Installation and Operation Permit. For today's discussion or hazardous waste inspection process, my presentation will cover those associated with a hazardous waste generating facility, not necessarily inspections at permitted TSDFs. All right, so at this point, let's talk about what happens during a hazardous waste inspection. So much like you've seen in the previous slide for the overall Ohio EPA inspection process, the agency inspector will arrive at your facility and conduct an opening meeting with you. As part of that opening meeting, we'll identify the purpose of the inspection. For example, is it a routine inspection? For example, a large quantity generator inspection. As part of that opening meeting, we'll discuss with you any type of confidentiality or trade secret issues. And why I say that is as part of our inspection, we will ultimately generate a compliance letter as well as inspection report. So it's important for your facility to identify any type of confidentiality or trade secret claims ahead of time so we can understand that and address that in our report appropriately. As part of that opening meeting, we'll also discuss with you what your generator category is and how you've determined that, as well as discuss with you what your processes are and waste management activities. Regarding your processes, you want to be able to describe what you're doing at your facility. For example, if you're a plating facility, what type of plating you may be doing and the type of chemicals that are involved in those plating operations. And then based on that process description, what are your waste management activities? The types of waste that you're generating. Are you first managing your waste in satellite accumulation areas and then moving them to a central accumulation area, either that being a container or a tank? So once again, being able to describe how your processes as well as how those wastes are being managed at the facility. And lastly, we'll talk about the type of documents we need to review. There will be another slide that focuses on that. As part of the records review that I just mentioned, we will review with you your waste evaluation information. I'm going to cover this concept in greater detail in a few slides, but the waste evaluation information process, or how you determine whether or not your waste is a hazardous waste, is very important in the hazardous waste management program. Like I mentioned, I will cover that in a few slides here. In addition, as part of that records review, we'll cover or review manifests and land disposal restriction forms, or LDR forms for short, inspection logs for hazardous waste containers and emergency equipment. For large quantity generators, we would review your personal training and contingency plan. And then if you are managing hazardous waste in a tank, we'll review that information that's applicable to your generator category. And lastly, any type of universal waste as well as used oil management information. All right, After the records review, we'll conduct a facility walkthrough. Now, what I will say is we may conduct the facility walkthrough before doing the records review. That would be up to the inspector, based on maybe timing at the facility as well. But in general, the facility walkthrough is going to cover the process operations. As I mentioned, being able to describe what you do and then walk the inspector through those operations. During the course of reviewing those process operations, we'll be looking for waste generation points. For example, where is waste generated in the process and how is it being accumulated? As I mentioned, is it being accumulated in a satellite area or is it being directly accumulated in a central accumulation area? Next bullet point summarizes that. During the course of the inspection, we'll be looking at your hazardous waste, used oil, and universal waste accumulation areas. One thing also to consider, when we talk about your process operations, also keep in mind you may have some ancillary operations that you're conducting in generating waste. For example, you may have a maintenance-related area where you may have potentially aerosol cans generated or even a parts washer. So understanding some of these ancillary operations and the types of wastes that are being generated is also key. As part of the facility walkthrough, we'll also look at your emergency equipment. Generally speaking, emergency equipment is needed at areas of or in close proximity to satellite accumulation areas as well as central accumulation areas. Now, you can have portable emergency equipment to respond to spills associated with these accumulation areas, but you would need to have emergency equipment available, like I said, for these areas. And lastly, the inspector may use a camera to collect photographs to document the inspection. As I previously mentioned, you can obtain a copy of those photographs, but ultimately some of those photographs or all of those photographs will be presented to you in an inspection report that the inspector completes. All right. So after the records review and the facility walkthrough, we'll conduct a closing meeting. And that closing meeting will identify whether there's compliance or if there were violations found. If there are violations found, we'll discuss with you the measures that are needed to correct the violations. And as I mentioned, if you don't have an answer to a question that the inspector has identified, it's okay to follow up with that individual to get that information to them. So there may be areas that require further information to be submitted to the agency. And lastly, there is compliance assistance information and pollution prevention opportunities that could be identified through the course of the inspection. I will cover at the end of the presentation a variety of compliance assistance and pollution prevention links that you guys can use. All right. For the hazardous waste inspection, what you want to do is ensure that you've evaluated all your waste. And once again, I'm going to come back to this concept of waste evaluation. In addition, being prepared for the hazardous waste inspection would include ensuring that you're managing your hazardous waste, universal waste, and used oil properly. In particular, your hazardous waste needs to be managed in accordance with your generator status. For small or large quantity generators, emergency response and communication is being maintained at or near the central accumulation areas as well as satellite areas. And lastly, maintaining hazardous waste related documents. These can include manifests, inspection logs, personal training records, and contingency plan. Once again, using these points will allow you to be prepared for a hazardous waste inspection. Okay, at this point, what I'd like to do is cover some of the common violations that are identified as part of the hazardous waste inspection process. As I mentioned in my previous slides, waste evaluation. Really, this is the cornerstone of hazardous waste management, or RCRA. Waste evaluation is the process by which a business or a facility evaluates or makes a determination if their waste is hazardous or not. There's a variety of compliance assistance resources that we can offer to you regarding this hazardous waste evaluation process. A couple of those being fact sheets that are available. Once again, I would refer to my handouts section and the compliance links that are provided. There is information on identifying if your waste is hazardous or not, as well as the use of generator knowledge. In addition, there was a presentation last week through the Compliance Assistance Conference on identifying what types of waste or what would make a waste a hazardous waste. In addition, what I would also encourage you to do is if you have a material that is being sent off for recycling or somehow excluded or exempt from the hazardous waste rules, having that documentation or evaluation available to us for review is needed. If you don't necessarily understand how your waste is being recycled or if it's excluded or exempt, please work with that vendor that you may be using to ensure that you clearly understand how that material is being managed. Once again, we want to make sure that any types of materials are being appropriately managed, and in particular, if they are exempt or excluded from the hazardous waste rules, that you have documentation to verify that. So when you do have a waste, you would want to evaluate it and keep that documentation available. And then obviously, based on that evaluation, manage the waste or hazardous waste appropriately. All right. Just in review, wanted to cover a couple types of hazardous waste, or kind of the summary of what types of hazardous waste may be generated. Obviously, you can have characteristic or listed hazardous waste. The characteristic hazardous waste can include ignitable, corrosive, reactive, or toxic. And generally, or actually, these are designated by the D codes. Whereas your listed hazardous waste, which come from various processes or commercial chemical products, these carry with them the F, K, P, and U codes. All right. Wanted to spend a few minutes on some of the situations that have arisen because of failing to evaluate hazardous or evaluating waste inappropriately. Ultimately, the waste wasn't evaluated and it turned out to be a hazardous waste, leading to some significant noncompliance. In one situation, an entity had generated paint-related waste. That waste wasn't evaluated and was being subsequently open burned. As such, that is unlawful treatment of a hazardous waste. Unfortunately, that is a significant noncompliance as a result of those activities. Another thing I will make a comment. I've done these inspections with my surface water and air colleagues, and my air colleague will make a plug about open burning. There's very limited situations as far as open burning. If you need information as to what types of materials can be open burned, I would suggest that you get in contact with your local agencies or even our Division of Air Pollution Control. But in general, open burning cannot be used for waste disposal. Another consequence of failing to evaluate waste is, in this situation, we had an entity that had generated a significant number or containers of waste. The waste was unevaluated and sat at the facility for a significant amount of time, well beyond any type of generator accumulation time frame. When the waste was evaluated, it was determined to be a hazardous waste, and as such, it led to the unlawful storage of hazardous waste, resulting in ultimately the lawful disposal of the waste, as well as cleaning up the area as to where it was stored. In this next situation, an entity had not evaluated their waste and caused that waste to be sent to a solid waste landfill. Upon evaluation, the waste turned out to be a hazardous waste, and it ultimately ended up being excavated from the solid waste landfill at a significant cost. And then in this last situation, waste incompatibility issues. In this situation, an entity had generated a waste. It actually turned out to be a sodium hydroxide waste or a high pH, which when the transporter's vehicle showed up to remove this waste, it was unknown to them that it contained this high pH sodium hydroxide. The waste reacted with the aluminum tanker, created pressure inside the tanker truck, and ultimately ruptured the tanker truck, resulting in a discharge of that hazardous waste onto the ground at the facility. So once again, I stress to you the need to do a proper waste evaluation to ensure your compliance with the hazardous waste laws and rules. As I mentioned, the hazardous waste evaluation process is really the cornerstone to the whole RCRA program or hazardous waste program. All right. So at this point, let's take a quick poll.
All right, I'll go ahead and launch that. Oh, sorry.
So question is, what is the cornerstone of the hazardous waste management program? Is it container labeling and dating, emergency equipment inspections, waste evaluation, or contingency plan development? Please select one of those answers.
Okay, now we'll go ahead and launch the poll. All right, it looks like most of you have voted. If you haven't selected your response, go ahead and do so now. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and I'll share the results.
All right, the results are in. Majority, vast majority, 85%, excellent. Waste evaluation. Thank you for answering that question correctly. Waste evaluation is the cornerstone of hazardous waste management. So kudos to you folks that answered that correctly. Thank you. All right. Okay, moving on in the presentation. At this point, I'd like to cover some other common violations that are reserved, in particular doing a walkthrough. And these are related to container management. First, whether it be for a satellite accumulation area or even management in a central accumulation area, containers of hazardous waste need to be labeled as hazardous waste. That's obviously prescribed by the rules, but labeling it as hazardous waste. For wastes that are in central accumulation areas, those containers need to have an accumulation start date on them that is visible for inspection. So what I mean by that is, being able to see the words hazardous waste, and then in particular, the accumulation start date. Those containers need to be positioned in a manner that allows us to see those. So it has to be clearly visible for inspection. The other container management violation that we see or issue that we see is what we call hazard indication. And this hazard indication became part of the generator improvement rule that was implemented back in, or became effective back in 2020. As part of the hazard indication, in addition, either for satellite or central accumulation areas, in addition to the word hazardous waste, this hazard indication needs to be present on the container. And that can be DOT markings that identify the hazards of the contents. It can be words that describe the hazards of the contents. For example, like the characteristic hazardous waste terminology that is used. For example, ignitable, corrosive, toxic, reactive. Those words are acceptable. It can also be based on the NFPA or HMIS labeling protocols as well. But this type of hazard indication needs to be present on both satellite and containers in central accumulation areas. Other common violations that we'll see related to container management are open containers. Containers need to be closed unless hazardous waste is being actively added to the container. For example, if you have a drum funnel on a drum, you want to ensure that that drum funnel is closed when you're not adding waste into that drum. If you have a super sack and you're accumulating, let's say, plating sludge, you want to ensure that that super sack or even Gaylord box is closed when waste is not being added to it. Other violations can include container condition. Obviously, from this photograph, the container is in poor condition, but if you come across a situation where the container becomes compromised, either it's maybe excessive pressure is built up and it's now bulging, resulting in the container condition to be compromised, or if the container develops a leak, obviously you would want to transfer that contents of that container to another drum or overpack it. Other common violations that we'll see are related to container management will include aisle space. You want to make sure that you have adequate aisle space to move amongst the containers, in particular to conduct inspections or get emergency equipment to those containers. All right. From the universal waste perspective, packaging and labeling violations are often seen. For example, universal waste lamps need to be accumulated in a closed container and be labeled with the words used lamps, waste lamps, or used lamps. Ohio has 3 specific universal wastes that we've adopted. Those include paint-related waste, aerosol cans, as well as antifreeze. The federal rules allow you, which we have adopted, also allow you to manage universal waste as being the lamps, batteries, mercury-containing devices, and pesticides. One thing I would like to bring to your attention is the universal waste aerosol cans. There is going to be a rule change that will likely take place later this month, here in October. It's going to affect the universal waste can management. If you're interested in hearing more about that change, there's another webinar today at 2 p.m. that's going to cover those issues or changes. Other common violations are related to used oil. For example, containers and tanks need to be labeled as used oil, not as waste oil, not as bad oil, but as used oil. And then if you do have a release of used oil, you would want to correct either the tank or container that is leaking, contain that spill, and then clean up and appropriately manage those released materials. All right, from a record-keeping perspective, some of the common violations that we see are associated with manifests and land disposal restriction notification forms. Related to the manifest or LDRs, sometimes they may be improperly completed. or you may not be maintaining the LTR notification at your facility. One thing I would like to point out is on your hazardous waste manifest, as I talked about this cradle to grave management, ultimately you want to ensure that you receive a copy of the hazardous waste manifest with the signature of the designated facility. That is your documentation that your hazardous waste was accepted at that permitted facility. Okay, other common violations, in particular related to a large quantity generator of hazardous waste, is personal training, in particular the personal training program. What we see is lack of job titles, job descriptions, and type of frequency of training, as well as failing to provide either the initial or annual refresher training. For a large quantity generator, other common violations that we see are related to the contingency plan. One of the things that we see is the plan doesn't get updated on a routine basis to either reflect changes to facility or personnel. So if there are any large quantity generators listening today, please take a look at your contingency plan. In particular, make sure that your emergency coordinators are up to date. The other thing that I would bring to your attention is this quick reference guide requirement. Quick reference guide was adopted or became effective through the generator improvement rule. And really that quick reference guide is a summation of the emergency response procedures at your facility. We do have compliance assistance resources to help you with documenting or coming up with a personnel training program or even a contingency plan. We have examples to assist you with those. Both of that types of information is available to you through the compliance assistance links that you'll find in the handouts section. Okay, so at this point, let's take a quick poll. All right, so specific to large quantity generators of hazardous waste, what records are they required to have? Does this include waste evaluation documentation, manifest LDRs, contingency plan, personal training program, or all of the above? Please select one answer.
All right, I'm launching the poll now. All right, it looks like most of you have selected your response. If you haven't, go ahead and do that now. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
All right, excellent. Great. Appreciate everybody's response on this question. Correct. All of the above. This is all type of information that large quantity generators need to have. So thank you for answering correctly. All right, back to the presentation. All right, so we've talked about the inspection process, shared with you some of the common violations and some compliance assistance resources. What I'd like to do is in these next slides cover with you what happens after the inspection. In general, you can apply this to the Ohio EPA inspection process as well. But after the inspection, the facility or company will receive either a compliance letter which means the facility is meeting the requirements that were reviewed during the inspection by that specific program. As I mentioned, if it's for hazardous waste rules and requirements, it would be a compliance letter related to that, those specific requirements. It does not mean it's compliance with all of Ohio EPA's regulations, just the inspector's division. The other thing that you may receive is a notice of violation letter. And that notice of violation letter will identify the non-compliance issues that were identified. This will include a description of the violations as well as what you need to do to correct the violations, as well as a time frame to provide a response. In addition, the inspection letter may be accompanied by an inspection report with checklists. From the hazardous waste program perspective, you would receive a notice of compliance or notice of violation, in addition to an inspection report that has a narrative of our observations and findings, as well as potentially photographs, as well as the checklist. All right, so after the inspection, a couple of do's and don'ts. So please contact the inspector if you have questions, about the inspection, or if there was something in the NOV that you don't understand. If there's something in the NOV that is wrong, please communicate that to the inspector as soon as possible. If you do not understand what is needed to correct the violations, please contact the inspector so you have a clear understanding as to what needs to be done to resolve the violation. Or if you have questions on the compliance process or need more time to respond. Generally speaking, we recognize that it may take longer than the initial response time frame. So if you do need additional time to respond, please contact the inspector. Please do not ignore the NOV. It's not going to go away. The other thing is, please don't wait till the last day to respond to the NOV, in particular if you need some additional time to get back into compliance. And lastly, don't cut off communications with the inspector. We are really a resource for helping you resolve the violations. Also recognize that most violations are resolved without legal actions or fines. We're here to offer compliance assistance, so work with us, and we would be able to work with you to get your facility back in compliance. Take steps to avoid enforcement. So what I mean by that is use today's presentation materials as well as a variety of the steps to ensure that your facility is in substantial compliance. And lastly, the final piece or communication that you would receive from the agency is when all the violations are corrected or resolved, you would receive a resolution of violation or resolution of violation letter. All right. As I mentioned, today's presentation is available to you in the handout section. So there's a variety of links that are on your screen that you can obtain from the PDF and click on. There's various compliance assistance documents for the hazardous waste program that I've offered in this slide. Our Office of Compliance Assistance and Pollution Prevention can be reached at the 1-800 number or via the web. Our Office of Compliance Assistance and Pollution Prevention Office is a free confidential assistance office that will work with you to answer questions as well as offer compliance assistance. So a great resource. Another compliance assistance resource is the Customer Support Center. And in particular, you can sign up for updates from the agency as to any type of pending rulemaking or anything of significant action. There is a tab to get notifications from the agency regarding those events. And lastly, your local Ohio EPA district office. We do have staff as well as compliance assistance resources that can help you regarding any questions that you may have. All right, so in conclusion, a couple presentation takeaways. Have a plan and designate a backup environmental contact if needed. Know your processes, your wastes that are generated, know your generator category, and when I say permit, this would also be applicable to potentially other inspections besides the hazardous waste generators. Retain documents to demonstrate compliance and keep them organized. Please be honest, do not speculate. And then if there are violations that are identified, please address them in a timely manner. All right. As I mentioned, Frank Zagalis with the Ohio EPA's Northeast District Office out of Twinsburg, Ohio. My contact information is available to you. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me or any of the compliance assistance staff.
Thank you, Frank.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Frank. Now we're going to answer some questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. If we don't answer your question during the Q&A portion, we'll reach out to you via email following today's session. All right, so our first question is, can I have more than one satellite accumulation drum area at the same time? If so, how should it be labeled?
Sure. So for satellite accumulation areas, you can have more than one container. Generally speaking, these containers can range from anywhere from 30 up to 55 gallons. But you can have more than one container of different wastes at the same area. So you could have two 55-gallon drums. One might be maybe a plating sludge versus maybe some type of degreasing waste being accumulated, at or near the point of generation, as well as these drums might be in close proximity to each other. As far as labeling these satellite accumulation area drums, the words hazardous waste as well as the hazard indication would be necessary on them.
Thanks, Frank. All right, it looks like we're coming up to the end of our webinar time. We'll make sure to follow up with any unanswered email or any unanswered questions via email following the presentation. Thanks again, Frank, for your great presentation, and thank you everyone for attending this session. Before we end the session today, we'd like to point your attention to another one of today's environmental fun facts. Ohio EPA's Recycling and Litter Prevention Grant Program supports communities, nonprofits, businesses, and academic institutions that initiate or expand recycling programs, encourage sustainable practices, stimulate economic growth, and support litter prevention efforts through our 4 different grants. Grants are awarded on an annual basis, and the 2023 cycle opens November 7th. You can scan the QR code on the slide to get more information about the grant program and how to apply. And lastly, Ohio EPA hosts a series of webinars throughout the year on a variety of environmental topics. This slide provides information on how to register for those upcoming webinars, where to find recordings of previous webinars, and how to sign up to receive notifications of upcoming webinars through our Ohio EPA Customer Support Center. And with that, we'll end the session of Ohio EPA's 2022 Virtual Compliance Assistance Conference. We hope you're able to join us for other conference sessions. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.